When I said my girlfriend was spending too much time with another guy, she replied he was in her life before me and was superior. So I called off our engagement party and sent them all packing. Months later, she returned pregnant and pleading to restore everything. Hey everyone, my name is Tyler, and I'm 29 years old. I run a custom muscle car garage in Nashville, and I've been absolutely crushing it since I opened the doors 4 years ago. We've even been featured in hot rod magazines, the whole deal. It's been quite the journey getting here, and I'm proud of what I've built. The story of how I got into this business is pretty wild. I got laid off from my engineering job a few years back, which felt like a disaster at the time. But I used my severance package to lease an old warehouse and decided to turn it into something real. The first year was complete hell. I'm talking about working 18-hour days, surviving on ramen noodles, and wondering if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. But now, 4 years later, celebrities are flying in from across the country for custom builds. It's surreal how things can turn around. The garage itself has this incredible industrial vibe that women either absolutely love or completely hate. There's no middle ground. We've got exposed brick walls throughout, vintage car signs covering every available surface, and classic rock always playing in the background. There's this constant smell of motor oil and metal that just becomes part of you after a while. I've got 2 full-time mechanics working for me now, and they're both guys who really know their stuff and don't create any drama. Lucas is this old-school Camaro guru who can diagnose problems just by listening to an engine idle. Tommy is a younger guy who's absolutely a wizard with modern muscle cars and all the computer systems they use now. 3 years ago, I was at this charity auction for wounded veterans when my whole world changed. It was being held at some fancy hotel ballroom. You know the type, with crystal chandeliers and everything. It was a black tie affair where everyone was trying to outbid each other on golf packages and fine dining experiences. I'd bought a table because my business was finally doing well enough that I could afford it. I figured it would be good for networking, plus supporting veterans felt like the right thing to do. My dad's military, and I have nothing but respect for guys who served our country. That's when this absolute smoke show walked up to my table. I'm talking about the kind of woman who stops conversations when she enters a room. Her name was Victoria. She was 25, and she worked as a marketing manager for some tech company downtown. She was blonde, fit as hell, and drove a BMW that her daddy had bought for her. She'd gone to Vanderbilt University on daddy's dime, too. You know the type I'm talking about. Victoria showed up wearing this little black dress that probably cost more than most people's rent. I watched her scanning the room like she was looking for someone specific, and when she spotted me in my tailored suit, she made her move. I'll admit it. I clean up pretty nice when I have to, and she definitely noticed. Not gonna lie, she was completely out of my league looks-wise. But I had something she wanted. Success, a growing business, and the kind of confidence that comes from building something from nothing. Plus, my garage was getting serious buzz around town, and she loved being seen with the cool car guy at her corporate events. My best friend Kevin was there that night, watching me work my magic with Victoria. Kevin is this guy who can roast the paint off a car with his sharp tongue, but somehow he makes everyone love him for it. He's 30 years old and works in construction management. Built like a brick house, but funnier than most stand-up comedians. The man has this sixth sense about people that's honestly scary accurate. He can read someone's true intentions within minutes of meeting them. I remember Kevin leaning over to me at some point during the evening and saying, "Bro, that chick's about as real as WWE wrestling." I should have listened to him right then and there, but I was completely distracted by Victoria's looks and the attention she was giving me. But Victoria was undeniably hot. And more importantly, she seemed genuinely interested in what I did for work instead of being embarrassed by it like some women might be. She didn't seem to mind the idea of getting her hands dirty when she came by the garage, at least not at first. That was refreshing compared to some of the other women I'd dated who acted like manual labor was beneath them. The early dating phase was actually pretty solid, looking back on it. She'd swing by the garage after work sometimes, bringing dinner from whatever trendy spot was popular downtown that week. She'd watch me work on cars and ask really good questions about what I was doing. She seemed genuinely interested in the craftsmanship aspect of custom car building, which meant a lot to me. Victoria even got her hands dirty a few times, helping me polish chrome on this vintage Chevelle I was restoring. Those moments made me think she was different from the typical privileged princess stereotype. My dad's reaction when I first brought Victoria around was absolutely classic. Pops is 63 years old, a retired Air Force mechanic who has zero filter whatsoever. This man will tell you exactly what he thinks, whether you want to hear it or not. But the thing is, he's usually right, which makes it even worse when you ignore his advice. She's pretty, son. But watch yourself, he told me after Victoria left that first dinner. Girls like that have expensive taste and high expectations. Make sure she's with you for the right reasons. I brushed off his concerns at the time, thinking he was just being overprotective. But looking back, his radar was spot on from day one. Fast forward through the whole dating dance, and 11 months ago I decided to pop the question. I dropped $9,000 on an engagement ring she'd been not so subtly hinting at for months. Our wedding was set for just 1 month from now, or at least it was supposed to be. The ring shopping experience was honestly an education in itself. We spent 4 full weekends hitting every jewelry store in Nashville, while Victoria explained cut, clarity, and color like she was teaching a masterclass in gemology. She had screenshots of her friends' engagement rings saved on her phone for comparison purposes, which should have been a red flag right there. But I was making good money at the time, and I figured if I was going to do this thing, I might as well do it right. My dad's reaction when I told him about the ring price was absolutely priceless. $9,000, son? He said, shaking his head slowly. I bought your mother's engagement ring for $400 in 1989. She's still wearing it 36 years later, and she cried when I gave it to her. Not because of the size, but because of what it meant to her. That should have given me pause, but I was too caught up in the moment to really process what he was trying to tell me. Here's where things get really interesting, and honestly, really suspicious. In the 3 years we'd been dating, Victoria had never once mentioned having a best friend named Brandon. Yes, that's actually his name, Brandon. Not once in 3 years had this person come up in conversation. And trust me, Victoria talks about everyone and everything. I know intimate details about her yoga instructor's messy divorce, her coworker's complicated dating life, and even her hairdresser's family drama. She's got strong opinions about people I've never met and probably never will meet. The woman could give you a full biography of her mailman if you asked. She documents every friendship, every connection, every person who's ever been even remotely significant in her life. But somehow, Brandon never came up. For someone who cataloged every relationship and social interaction like she was writing a memoir, this was suspicious as hell. How do you just forget to mention someone who's supposedly been in your life for years? Until 3 months ago, when she dropped this completely casual announcement about her friend Brandon from college moving to Nashville for work. 3 years of dating, and this is the first time I'm hearing about this guy. Something definitely wasn't adding up here. When Brandon rolled into town, I could immediately tell what type of guy he was. He's 27 years old, stands 6'3" tall, and looks like he stepped straight off the cover of a magazine. The guy works for Sterling and Associates, one of those high-end consulting firms that charges companies millions of dollars to tell them stuff their own employees probably already know. He drives a brand new Porsche Macan and probably spends more money on his skincare routine and manicured nails than most guys spend on their entire wardrobe. Sterling's one of those consulting firms that's all about image and prestige. They charge Fortune 500 companies astronomical fees to come in and analyze their operations. Brandon's got that typical consultant swagger. He talks exclusively in corporate buzzwords, name drops clients like he's personally responsible for their success, and acts like he's single-handedly responsible for every Fortune 500 success story he's ever worked on. But it wasn't just his looks or his job that set off every alarm bell in my head. It was the way Victoria acted around him that really bothered me. I've seen her excited about things before. New restaurants, weekend trips, even meeting celebrities at charity events. But this was completely different. The way she hugged him at the airport was like watching a teenager meet her favorite pop star. She was literally jumping up and down with excitement. The way she introduced us was even worse. She introduced me to Brandon like I was her tax accountant or something, completely casual and dismissive. Meanwhile, Brandon gave me this weak, soft handshake while immediately starting to talk to Victoria like I wasn't even standing there. The disrespect was immediate and obvious. Then he started pulling out his phone, showing her pictures and talking about some inside joke about spring break in Cabo. They're both laughing and reminiscing while completely ignoring the fact that I'm standing right there, feeling like a third wheel at my own girlfriend's reunion. The spring break photos were particularly annoying to watch. Brandon was scrolling through shot after shot of him and Victoria on some tropical beach, both of them looking like they'd stepped out of a resort commercial. She was wearing a bikini that left nothing to the imagination. He was shirtless, showing off his expensive gym membership. And they were posed like a couple in every single photo. Remember when we went parasailing? Brandon asked, showing her a photo of them harnessed together in the air. Oh my God, yes! That was absolutely amazing, Victoria practically squealed, leaning into him to get a better look at the screen. I'm standing there wondering why my fiancé had never mentioned going parasailing with some guy, let alone having intimate photos of the experience that she was apparently fond enough of to let him keep on his phone. Kevin was with me during this whole awkward airport encounter. He'd driven me there because my truck was in the shop getting new tires, and he was witnessing this entire performance firsthand. Kevin's facial expressions are honestly better than cable television. The man can communicate an entire roast session with just his eyebrows. He was giving me that look that clearly said, "Bro, you seeing this shit?" without having to say a word. I tried my best to be cool about the whole situation. Maybe they were just catching up after not seeing each other for a while, right? Old friends reconnecting and all that. But after 45 minutes of being a complete third wheel while my fiancé giggled at some other dude's stories, I'd reached my absolute limit. This was supposed to be a quick airport pickup, not a nostalgic reunion where I felt like an unwelcome observer. When I finally tried to make some conversation about Brandon's work, hoping to include myself in the discussion, he immediately started bragging about his mid-six-figure salary and how Sterling really takes care of their consultants. "We stay at the Four Seasons on the company's dime," Brandon said, casually adjusting his Rolex like it was no big deal. "First-class flights, five-star hotels, unlimited expense accounts. It's pretty sweet, honestly." Before I could even respond with anything about my own business success or financial situation, Victoria immediately jumped in with an offer that made my blood boil. "Oh, you should just stay in our guest room," she said enthusiastically. "It'll be so much more fun than some boring hotel." Our guest room. In my house. The house that I had bought and paid for. The house where I was busting my ass to pay off the mortgage early so we could start our marriage completely debt-free. She was offering up my space to this guy without even consulting me first. When I tried to object, pointing out that the Four Seasons seemed more suited to his expensive tastes anyway, she immediately shut me down. "Babe, it's okay. Come on, he's an old friend," she said, using that tone that women use when they want to make you feel like you're being unreasonable for having perfectly valid concerns. An old friend who had somehow never existed in any conversation until 3 months ago, but was now important enough to move into my house without my input. On the drive home, Kevin was already warming up his commentary. "Homeboy's got the loyalty of a rental car," he said, shaking his head. "Plus, he was checking out that bartender at the airport bar while your girl was talking to him. You didn't notice that part, did you?" I hadn't noticed the bartender situation, but Kevin notices everything. The man has a radar for people's true intentions that's almost supernatural. If Kevin was picking up on sketchy behavior, there was definitely sketchy behavior happening. So Brandon moved into my guest room temporarily while he looked for his own place. Except this dude made himself completely at home within the first 48 hours. He was using my gym equipment like he owned it, eating my food without asking, and even had the absolute balls to rearrange my living room furniture because it wasn't conducive to conversation. My home gym is set up in the converted garage space. Olympic weights, squat rack, heavy bag, the whole setup. It took me 3 years to put together piece by piece, saving up for each component and researching the best equipment. Brandon started using it like he'd been paying rent there for years, never cleaning up after himself, leaving his protein shaker bottles in my sink, and adjusting all my equipment settings without asking. But the furniture situation was what really pushed me over the edge. I came home from work one day to find my living room completely rearranged. My leather sectional had been moved to face the kitchen instead of the TV. My coffee table had been replaced with some modern art piece that Victoria had apparently bought. He'd even taken down my vintage Mustang posters and replaced them with abstract paint splatters, because apparently those were more sophisticated. "What the hell is going on here, Victoria?" I asked when I found her admiring the new setup. "Who gave your friend permission to redecorate my house?" "Oh my God, lower your voice, Tyler!" Victoria hissed, glancing nervously toward the guest room. "He's used to a more sophisticated aesthetic. He was just trying to help make the space more welcoming." A more sophisticated aesthetic. In my house. The house I worked my ass off to buy and maintain. "Then maybe he should get his own place where he can have whatever aesthetic he wants," I replied. She didn't like that suggestion one bit. Victoria immediately started defending Brandon, and I watched her transform right before my eyes. Suddenly, nothing I did was good enough anymore. My house needed to be more sophisticated for Brandon's refined tastes. My drink selection was embarrassing compared to what he was used to. I needed to dress better because Brandon was accustomed to a certain standard of presentation, and she wanted me to become some preppy country club version of myself just to impress this freeloading pretty boy. The criticism was constant and demoralizing. Every aspect of my life that she'd previously seemed to accept or even appreciate was now being held up against Brandon's standards and found lacking. It was like she was trying to mold me into a clone of him, which was both insulting and completely unrealistic. Victoria even started shopping for my clothes without asking me. She'd show up with bags from Nordstrom filled with button-down shirts and khakis that looked exactly like Brandon's consultant uniform. When I pointed out that I already had clothes and my own personal style that had worked just fine for 3 years, she said I needed to elevate my look for our social circle. Our social circle. Since when did we have a social circle that required elevation? I'd been perfectly happy with my friends from the garage, my dad, and the occasional industry networking event. But apparently that wasn't sophisticated enough for the new standards being set in my own home. The worst part was watching them together. They had constant inside jokes that I couldn't participate in, endless college stories about spring break trips and people I'd never heard of, and shared memories that made me feel like an outsider in my own living room. When I'd try to join the conversation or contribute something relevant, Victoria would shut me down with comments like, "You wouldn't get it because college was different back then," or "It's just a Vanderbilt thing." Yeah, sorry I didn't go to fancy Vanderbilt University and spend daddy's money on elaborate spring break trips to exotic locations. I was too busy trying to build something real and meaningful instead of partying away my 20s on someone else's dime. Their college stories always involved expensive parties, lavish trips to places like Cabo and Miami, and situations that honestly sounded more like dating than friendship. There were multiple references to formal dances where Brandon had been Victoria's date because she couldn't find anyone else, which seemed like a pretty convenient excuse for what looked like couple behavior in retrospect. Kevin came by one evening and witnessed the entire performance firsthand. After Brandon and Victoria went out for their nightly catch-up walk around the neighborhood, leaving me to clean up dinner dishes like some kind of domestic servant, Kevin absolutely let me have it. "Bro, I've seen some pathetic stuff in my time," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "But watching you get pushed around in your own living room takes the cake. What the hell is going on here? Why haven't you told him to get the hell out?" Every single evening after dinner, Brandon and Victoria would disappear for these long walks around the neighborhood. Just the two of them, talking about whatever they needed to talk about in private, while I was left behind to handle the cleanup or retreat to the garage to work on cars. The walks would last for an hour or more, and they'd come back laughing and whispering like teenagers with secrets. The situation got even worse when my dad stopped by the following weekend for our usual Sunday visit. He got his first real look at the Brandon show, and his reaction was immediate and telling. My dad and I have this sacred tradition. Every other Sunday he comes over and we grill steaks on the back deck, drink a couple of beers, and work on whatever project I've got going in the garage. These Sundays are absolutely sacred to me. They're our time to catch up, talk about life, and maintain the close relationship we've always had. Pops walked into my living room and saw Brandon sprawled across my couch in his expensive athleisure wear, eating my food and watching Victoria fuss over him like he was visiting royalty. My dad just stopped and stared for about 30 seconds before he spoke, and the silence was deafening. "Who's the Ken doll?" he asked, his voice completely flat and unimpressed. Brandon tried to introduce himself with that fake consulting charm, talking about his exciting work in corporate strategy and how grateful he was for our hospitality. But my dad just nodded politely and walked away. That's when you know Pops really doesn't like someone. He gets polite. When he likes you, he's casual and friendly. When he doesn't like you, he becomes formally courteous, which is somehow much worse. We stepped onto the back deck to fire up the grill, and my dad didn't waste any time getting to the point. "That boy's not looking for an apartment, son," he said, opening his beer and giving me a direct look. "He's already found one. Yours. And your girl's acting like she's already moved in with him." My dad continued his brutal assessment without pulling any punches. "I've been married for 36 years, son," he said, taking a long sip of his beer and looking me straight in the eye. "I know what just friends looks like, and that ain't it. That boy's got designs on your woman, and she's letting him have them." His words hit me like a punch to the gut because I knew he was right. My dad has always been able to cut through bullshit and see situations for what they really are. He'd watched my mom's friendships, his own friendships, and countless other relationships over the decades. When he said something didn't look right, it didn't look right. That boy's not looking for his own place because he's already moved into yours, he continued. And your fiancée is acting like she's already made her choice about who she wants to be with. The question is, what are you going to do about it? But things got seriously messed up when Brandon started inserting himself into our wedding planning. This guy suddenly had opinions about everything. The music selection, the flower arrangements, the catering menu, even the groomsmen gifts. And Victoria was eating it up like he was some kind of wedding expert, constantly referencing Brandon's amazing taste and how he understood what she liked better than anyone, including her fiancé who she was supposedly marrying in less than a month. The music situation was particularly infuriating. Victoria and I had already spent weeks picking out songs for the reception, a careful mixture of classic rock, some country, and a few romantic ballads that represented both of our tastes and our relationship. But Brandon thought our playlist was too basic and not sophisticated enough for the venue. He spent hours on my laptop using my Spotify account to create an entirely new playlist full of jazz and obscure indie songs that nobody would want to dance to. Trust me, this will create the perfect ambience, Brandon explained, scrolling through his carefully curated selection like he was planning a gallery opening instead of a wedding reception. Your guests will appreciate the elevated musical selection. Elevated musical selection. For a wedding that was supposed to be about Victoria and me, not about impressing people with how cultured and sophisticated we were. But Victoria was nodding along enthusiastically, like Brandon had just solved all of our problems. But the absolute breaking point came during our scheduled cake tasting appointment. Brandon had to come along because he understood Victoria's refined palate, which was news to me since Victoria had never mentioned having a refined palate during 3 years of dating. She'd always been perfectly happy eating pizza, burgers, tacos, and other completely normal food. But suddenly, she had this sophisticated palate that required expert consultation from Brandon. The cake tasting was supposed to be one of those fun, romantic experiences that engaged couples do together. Instead, it turned into another opportunity for Brandon to demonstrate his superior taste and knowledge. He had opinions about flavor combinations, frosting textures, and presentation styles that Victoria treated like gospel. When we finally picked a cake, Brandon's choice naturally, Victoria turned to him with this look of pure adoration and said, "You always know exactly what I want." She asked Brandon for approval on our wedding cake. The guy who'd been in town for a few weeks somehow understood what my fiancé wanted, better than I did after 3 years of dating, engagement, and wedding planning. When I questioned why his opinion seemed to matter more than mine, Victoria called me insecure. Insecure for wanting my fiancé to value my opinion about our own wedding. Brandon just has really good taste, she explained, like that settled everything. He knows what works for events like this. Our wedding had become just an event that required Brandon's expertise to execute properly. Not a celebration of our love and commitment, but a social gathering that needed to meet certain standards of sophistication. When I told Kevin about the cake incident later that day, he nearly spit out his drink. "Let me get this straight," he said, laughing in disbelief. "Barbie asked Captain Consultation for approval on your wedding cake? Bro, she's not marrying you. She's holding you hostage while she figures out if Brandon's going to make it official." Now this is where the whole situation completely cracked open, and I finally got the truth I'd been dreading. Last week, I was working late in my garage, rebuilding an engine for this custom Challenger project that had been consuming most of my evenings. When I heard Brandon and Victoria talking on the back patio, I thought nothing of it at first. The car was a gorgeous 1978 Challenger that some collector wanted completely restored to original specifications. It was a beautiful machine, but the engine was completely shot and needed to be rebuilt from the ground up. I'd been working on it for weeks, staying late to get the timing absolutely perfect. There's something meditative about taking apart something complex and rebuilding it better than it was before. It helps me think and process things. I had some classic rock playing while I worked, volume low enough that I could concentrate but loud enough to enjoy the music. I had the garage door open for ventilation, which turned out to be a lucky thing, because that's when I overheard their conversation. They obviously thought I couldn't hear them over the music and the sound of my tools, but I've got good ears from years of listening to subtle engine problems and diagnosing issues by sound. "Victoria, are you really sure about this whole marriage thing?" Brandon asked, and his question stopped me cold. I immediately shut off my impact wrench and listened carefully. "Tyler is a good guy," Victoria replied, but her voice sounded strange and uncertain, like she was trying to convince herself of something she wasn't entirely sure about. Good guys finish last, though, Brandon said, and I could hear the manipulation in his voice. Victoria, you deserve someone who matches your intellect, your ambition, your class. Your class. There it was. The thing Brandon had been dancing around for 7 weeks. I wasn't in Victoria's class. Not smart enough, not ambitious enough, not sophisticated enough for her social circle. Not good enough for her period. It's complicated, Victoria said, and I could hear the doubt creeping into her voice. It doesn't have to be complicated, Brandon replied smoothly. You know there's always been something between us. Something real. Always been something between us. 7 years of so-called friendship, and this preppy manipulator had never stopped wanting her. He'd been playing the long game the entire time, positioning himself as the superior choice while systematically undermining my relationship with Victoria. Think about what we could have together, he continued. What we've always been building toward. Building toward. For 7 years, while she was dating other people, while I was falling in love with her and planning a future with her, Brandon had been waiting in the wings and building toward this exact moment. This wasn't some spontaneous realization. This was a calculated plan that had been years in the making. I shut off the music completely and went inside. But sleep was absolutely impossible that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction, every red flag, every moment when I should have seen this coming. The next morning, I called Kevin first thing. Finally, he said when I told him what I'd heard. I was wondering when Captain Cuckold was going to show his true colors. What exactly did you hear? I told him everything. The whole conversation, word for word, every inflection and pause. Bro, that dude just told you exactly what he's been planning this whole time, Kevin said. He's been working on this for months, probably years. The question is, what are you going to do about it? What was I going to do about it? Well, that's when things started getting really interesting. That afternoon, I decided it was time to force the situation and get some honest answers. I told Victoria it was time for Brandon to find his own place, that we needed space to focus on our relationship with the wedding only 4 weeks away. Brandon needs to find his own place, I said when Victoria got home from work. The wedding's in 4 weeks, and we need to focus on us. The reaction was immediate and absolutely nuclear. She called me selfish for wanting Brandon out when he was just trying to establish himself in a new city. When I pointed out that he had a 6-figure salary and could easily afford his own place, she threatened to postpone the wedding if I was going to be jealous and controlling. He's my oldest friend, Tyler. How can you be so heartless? She said, her voice rising with indignation. There it was. She'd rather postpone our wedding than ask her friend to get his own apartment. You'd postpone our wedding for Brandon? I asked, needing to hear her say it explicitly. I'd postpone our wedding because you're acting paranoid and controlling, she shot back. This is exactly the kind of behavior that makes me question whether you're ready for marriage. Paranoid for not wanting another man living in my house. Controlling for wanting my fiancée to prioritize our relationship over her house guest. So I decided to ask her the question that would settle everything once and for all. If you had to choose between me and Brandon right now, today, what would you say? Victoria stared at me for what felt like an eternity. The silence stretched and stretched until it became its own answer. I could literally see her brain working overtime, trying to figure out the right response that would somehow let her keep both of us in her life without having to make a real choice. That's a ridiculous question, she finally said, but her voice lacked conviction. It's actually a pretty simple question, I replied, keeping my voice steady. If you had to choose right now, who would you pick? I shouldn't have to choose between my fiancé and my friend, she said, but I could see the panic in her eyes. But if you did have to choose, I pressed, needing to hear her answer. Another pause that lasted forever. I watched her face carefully, studying every micro-expression, and I saw the exact moment she realized there was no good answer. No way to avoid revealing the truth that had been building for weeks. Then Brandon's been in my life longer, she said finally. 7 years versus 3 years. Brandon wins. The answer hit me like a physical blow to the gut, but it also clarified absolutely everything. She'd made her choice, and it wasn't me. She'd probably been making this choice for the past 7 weeks, maybe even longer. I was just the last person to know about it. I called Kevin immediately after Victoria stormed out of the house. She chose him, bro, I said, still processing what had just happened. Of course she did, Kevin replied without surprise. Princess wants her prince, not the mechanic. At least now you know where you stand. I spent the rest of that day making phone calls and taking care of business. I called my lawyer first, wanting to know exactly where I stood legally. In Tennessee, engagement rings are considered conditional gifts. If the wedding gets called off, I get the ring back regardless of who ends the engagement. Good information to have. Next, I called the venue, the caterer, the band, and the photographer. I canceled everything. Lost some deposits, but I was saving myself from a much bigger and more expensive mistake. The venue manager was surprisingly understanding about the situation. Apparently, wedding cancellations happen more often than you'd think, and it's better to lose a deposit than pay for an entire wedding to the wrong person. The caterer was less understanding about the cancellation. $6,000 down the drain, but they'd already ordered specialty items and couldn't return them. The photographer was actually pretty cool about it and even offered to do a photo shoot with my cars instead, which sounded like a much better use of his time. Then I called my crew: Kevin, my brother Derek, Lucas from the garage, and my cousin Rick, who works in private security. I told them all to come over that evening because I was going to need witnesses for what came next. Derek drove down from Memphis specifically for this. He's 2 years older than me and has absolutely zero patience for relationship drama. Lucas closed the garage early and showed up with a cooler full of energy drinks. Rick arrived in his off-duty security gear, looking like he was ready for serious trouble. Kevin showed up first, carrying a cooler of sodas and wearing his biggest grin. "This is going to be better than pay-per-view," he said, settling into my living room like he was about to watch the main event. "You're finally going to grow a pair and kick these freeloaders out." When Victoria and Brandon returned from dinner, another meal I hadn't been invited to, another decision made without consulting me, I was waiting in the living room with my crew and some very official-looking paperwork. The look on their faces when they walked in and saw 5 guys sitting there like a tribunal was absolutely priceless. Brandon went pale as a sheet, and Victoria's face turned bright red with anger. "Tyler, we need to talk about this morning," Victoria started, but I cut her off immediately. "Actually, we don't need to talk about anything," I said calmly. "Brandon, you've got until tomorrow morning to get all your stuff out of my house." "Excuse me?" Victoria's voice hit that high pitch that usually means serious trouble is coming. "And Victoria, here's your 30-day notice," I continued, handing her the eviction papers. "You're moving out too." She looked at the legal documents like they were written in a foreign language, then looked at me, then at my 4 friends sitting there like a jury. When she finally realized I was completely serious, her face went nuclear. The whole scene played out exactly as I'd expected it would. Victoria started claiming that I couldn't just take back an engagement ring, so I calmly explained Tennessee law regarding conditional gifts. Brandon tried to play peacemaker and smooth things over until Rick offered to help him find his room and pack his belongings. Rick's got this particular way of standing that makes people extremely nervous. He's 6'4", 260 pounds of solid muscle, and has 22 years of experience dealing with actual problems. Brandon took one look at him and immediately decided that cooperation was definitely the better part of valor. Victoria tried to argue that people can have friends of the opposite sex and that I was being unreasonable and controlling. But the evidence was overwhelming at this point. She'd chosen Brandon over me, threatened to postpone our wedding for him, and taken his advice on everything from flower arrangements to furniture placement. "Ring, Victoria, hand it over," I said, extending my hand. She threw the engagement ring at me in a fit of rage. I caught it midair. All that time, fine-tuning carburetors and working with small parts had paid off in reflexes. "Fine, take your stupid ring," she spat. "But don't come crawling back when you realize what you've lost." "I know exactly what I'm dodging," I replied. Kevin couldn't resist getting in the last word. "Give it a week," he said with a grin. "Money says they're posting couple photos by Friday." The next morning, Brandon was gone. He packed up all his designer luggage and expensive skincare products and slithered back to his fancy hotel like the snake he'd always been. Victoria spent the entire day crying and throwing things into boxes, while my crew made sure she didn't accidentally damage anything on her way out. Lucas and Tommy from the garage helped her load her stuff into a U-Haul truck. By noon, she was officially out of my house and out of my life. But by that same afternoon, my phone was absolutely exploding with calls and messages. Her parents, her sister, her bridesmaids, even some of her co-workers. Everyone had something to say about what a terrible person I was for humiliating Victoria like this. According to them, I was the villain in this story for having the audacity to not want to marry someone who'd chosen another man over me. Her mom called first, screaming about how I'd embarrassed their entire family and destroyed her daughter's happiness. When I tried to explain that Victoria had literally chosen Brandon over me when forced to pick, she hung up on me. Apparently, the truth wasn't something she wanted to hear. Her dad called about an hour later. He was more reasonable than his wife, but still angry about the situation. "Sir, I didn't humiliate anyone," I told him calmly. "I just decided not to marry someone who doesn't actually want to marry me." My dad was sitting next to me during most of these phone calls, shaking his head and occasionally making comments like, "That woman's got some nerve," and "These people are completely delusional." At one point, he looked at me and said, "When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Your girl showed you exactly who she was, and it's a good thing you were paying attention." Victoria's bridesmaids were sending group texts calling me controlling and manipulative, unable to handle Victoria having male friends. According to their version of events, I was the problem for not trusting Victoria's friendship with Brandon. They completely ignored the fact that this friend had been living in my house, rearranging my furniture and actively trying to break up my engagement. Male friends don't move into your house, redecorate your living room, and tell you that you deserve better than your fiancé. But logic wasn't really their strong suit. Meanwhile, Victoria was posting on Instagram about toxic masculinity and insecure men who can't handle strong women. She was really painting herself as the victim in this situation, telling a story about how I'd thrown her out simply for having a friend. Her narrative was that I was insecure and controlling, and she was the innocent victim of my jealousy. The comments on her posts were split between her sorority sisters supporting her victim narrative and people who actually knew what had happened calling her out. A few mutual friends reached out to me privately, asking what had really gone down because Victoria's version didn't match what they'd observed. Kevin was having an absolute field day with her social media posts. "Look at this one," he said, showing me his phone. "Sometimes you have to cut toxic people out of your life to protect your peace." He was laughing as he read it. "Yeah, good thing you cut yourself out of his life, sweetheart. Within 6 days of moving out of my house, guess where Victoria ended up? Brandon's new downtown loft. What are the odds of that coincidence?" Brandon had apparently found himself a furnished apartment in one of those luxury high-rise buildings downtown, and Victoria moved right in as his temporary roommate while she figured out her next steps. The speed of this transition was remarkable, almost like it had been planned in advance. Their social media activity told the whole story in real time. Suddenly, they were posting photos together constantly, with captions about getting through tough times with real friends and being grateful for people who truly support you. The photos got progressively more couple-like, while they maintained the ridiculous fiction that they were just friends, helping each other through a difficult period. The body language in every photo told a completely different story than their captions. These weren't pictures of friends. These were pictures of two people who were clearly in a romantic relationship, but trying to maintain some kind of plausible deniability. Kevin kept sending me screenshots because he thought I'd be upset about seeing them together. But honestly, I was relieved. Watching their little performance just confirmed that I'd made absolutely the right decision. "Look at this caption," he'd say. "So grateful for friends who really understand me." Yeah, friends who understand that you need to get naked together. My dad's take on the situation was much simpler and more direct. "Son, actions don't lie," he said. "Those two are together now, and they were probably together before you found out about it. You're better off without either of them." 4 weeks later, on what would have been my wedding day, I was at the gym when I met Sophia. She's a physical therapist who owns her own practice, and she doesn't cry when someone disagrees with her opinions. I'd been hitting the gym hard since the breakup, partly for stress relief and partly because I suddenly had a lot of extra time without wedding planning consuming my evenings. Exercise was helping me process everything that had happened and move forward with my life. Sophia was doing deadlifts at the squat rack next to mine with absolutely perfect form, lifting more weight than most of the guys in the gym. When she noticed me watching her technique, she smiled and asked if I was checking her form or just being creepy. "Checking your form," I replied honestly. "Most people lift with their back instead of their legs, but you actually know what you're doing." We grabbed coffee after our workout, and she asked what I did for work. When I told her about the car garage, her eyes lit up with genuine interest. "That's so cool," she said. "Is it true that muscle cars are harder to handle than modern cars?" No shame about blue-collar work, no condescension, just genuine curiosity and respect for what I did. When I offered to teach her how to drive stick shift, she jumped at the chance. Sophia is different from Victoria in every way that actually matters. She's got her own money, her own successful business, and her own goals in life. She doesn't need anyone to take care of her or validate her choices. When we go out to dinner, she insists on splitting the check until I can convince her to let me pay. It's refreshing to be with someone who values independence and doesn't see relationships as a meal ticket. We weren't officially dating at this point. I wasn't about to jump into another serious relationship that quickly after what I'd just been through. But we were definitely enjoying each other's company as friends, and I was taking things slowly and carefully this time around. When Sophia met Kevin and my dad about a month later, Kevin's verdict was immediate and enthusiastic approval. "Bro, she looks at you like you're the only guy in the room," he said after she left. "Not like she's shopping for a husband or comparing you to other options." "Kevin, we're not officially dating yet," I reminded him. "Shut up, dude. You're acting like relationships are rocket science," he replied. "This one's different, and you know it." My dad's approval was even more meaningful to me. "Son, this one's a keeper," he said simply. "I can tell she's got her head screwed on straight and her priorities in order." 5 months after the breakup, I was at my garage working on a custom job when my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I answered anyway since sometimes customers call from different phones. "Tyler, it's me, Victoria!" came the voice on the other end, and she was crying hard. My first instinct was to hang up immediately. We had absolutely nothing to talk about, and I'd moved on with my life. But something in her voice made me stay on the line for a moment. "How'd you get this number?" I asked. "Please don't hang up. I need to talk to you," she said through her tears. Turns out she'd gotten my number from Lucas at the garage. She'd apparently shown up there crying, convinced him to give her my personal cell phone number because it was supposedly an emergency. Victoria told me she'd made a horrible mistake and needed me back. But here's the real kicker. She was pregnant. Brandon was gone, and she had absolutely nothing left. He'd used her, told her he'd always loved her, gotten her to break up with me, and then disappeared the second she told him about the pregnancy. "Sounds like you picked the wrong guy," I said. "I picked wrong," she admitted. "You were the right guy. You're stable and dependable and good and beneath your social class." "I remember that conversation," I interrupted. "Tyler, please, I have nothing left," she continued desperately. "Brandon moved back to Chicago without telling anyone. My parents are furious with me. I can't afford my apartment alone." Apparently, Brandon's consulting firm had offered him a transfer to their Chicago office, and he'd taken it immediately. He didn't discuss it with Victoria, didn't even tell her until 2 days before he left. Just packed up and disappeared when things got complicated. "Call your friends," I suggested. They had a lot to say about what a catch Brandon was. "They're not talking to me either," she said miserably. "Now they all think I'm an idiot for leaving you for Brandon." "Finally, something we can all agree on," I replied. She begged me to give her another chance, offering counseling sessions and prenups, anything I wanted. "I do love you. I realized it when I lost you," she said. "You realized it when you got knocked up and abandoned by Prince Charming?" I corrected her. I hung up and immediately blocked the number. But Victoria didn't give up that easily. She started showing up at my garage, crying in the parking lot about how sorry she was and how much she'd learned from her mistakes. This was bad for business and even worse for my peace of mind. The first time she showed up bawling in the parking lot, I ignored her completely. The second time, I had Lucas tell her she wasn't welcome on the property. The third time, I started taking photos of her behavior. That's when I decided to file for a restraining order. The look on Victoria's face when the bailiff served her with the restraining order was absolutely priceless. It was pure shock that actions actually have consequences, and that showing up at someone's workplace repeatedly after being told to leave is actually illegal harassment. 7 months later, I was at a car show in Atlanta with Sophia when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message had a photo attached, and it was obviously from someone who knew about my history with Victoria. The photo showed Victoria, clearly very pregnant, working behind the counter at some chain restaurant. She looked exhausted and miserable, wearing a cheap polyester uniform. The message said, "Thought you'd want to see how your ex is doing. Karma's a bitch." It was probably from one of her former bridesmaids who had turned against her after the whole Brandon situation blew up in her face. Victoria had burned a lot of bridges with her poor choices, and apparently some people were enjoying watching her face the consequences. Looking at that photo didn't give me any satisfaction, though. It just confirmed that I dodged a bullet the size of a freight train. Victoria looked miserable, tired, and swollen, dealing with whatever abuse food service workers have to endure from difficult customers. Sophia saw the text and just shrugged. "Sucks for her, but that's what happens when you blow up your life for the wrong guy," she said matter-of-factly. No drama, no jealousy, no need to analyze Victoria's situation or compare herself to my ex. Just a simple acknowledgement that poor choices have consequences. Brandon never came back to Nashville, by the way. Word through mutual acquaintances was that he got transferred to Sterling's Paris office right after the Chicago move. The consulting firm probably moved him overseas to avoid any potential drama from his Nashville situation. Corporate consulting firms don't like personal scandals affecting their professional reputation, so it was much easier to ship him off to Paris, where nobody knew about the pregnant ex-girlfriend he'd abandoned. Victoria's parents cut her off completely after the whole mess became public knowledge. They were apparently more embarrassed about their daughter's poor choices and the scandal it created than they were concerned about her actual welfare. It's classic rich people problems. Image and reputation matter more than family when things get messy. Her social media went completely dark after the restaurant photos started circulating among our mutual acquaintances. No more posts about toxic masculinity or strong women being misunderstood. Just silence, and what I imagine was a lot of regret about the choices that had led her to this point. The last I heard through the grapevine, Victoria was living in some run-down apartment complex on the south side of town, working double shifts at the restaurant to save up money for baby expenses. The BMW got repossessed when she couldn't make the payments. The designer clothes got sold off piece by piece. Even the country club membership that Daddy had been paying for got canceled. Meanwhile, Sophia and I had become officially exclusive, and she'd even moved into my house. She absolutely loves the garage and gets along great with my crew. She thinks custom muscle cars are badass and has started talking about converting part of the garage space into a workshop where she can restore vintage furniture as a hobby. The woman has her own interests and passions, which is incredibly attractive. My dad is absolutely thrilled about Sophia, too. "This one's got her head screwed on straight and her priorities in order," he told me recently. "She makes you better without trying to change who you are. I'm happy for you, son. What can I say about the whole situation? Sometimes the trash really does take itself out. Call me old school, but I don't believe in building a life with someone who's still mentally stuck in spring break mode with her college friend. If recognizing that dynamic and refusing to accept it makes me insecure, then I'll take insecurity over stupidity any day of the week." Now here's my question for everyone reading this story. How would you have handled it if you were in my shoes? I'm curious to hear perspectives from both guys and girls on this situation. But wait, I thought my story was completely finished, but apparently the universe had other plans for me. I'm about to post an update that involves our favorite Ken doll Brandon, and you're absolutely not going to believe what happened next. Update. What's up, everyone? I'm back with an update that happened about 3 months after I got the restraining order against Victoria. I was delivering a custom Mustang to this tech executive who lives in Belle Meade, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Nashville. It was a beautiful car, a 2019 Shelby GT 350 with custom paintwork, upgraded suspension, and a full exhaust system. The whole package was a work of art, and the guy had paid cash for it without asking any questions about the price. While I was going through the delivery checklist with him, making sure everything was perfect, he mentioned that he was flying to Paris the next week for meetings with some sterling consultants. "They're a bunch of pretentious kids who think they know everything about business just because they went to fancy schools," he said, shaking his head in frustration. Then he dropped a name that immediately caught my attention and made me pay very close attention to what he was saying. "There's this one particular douche named Brandon Morrison," he continued. "The guy acts like he personally invented consulting. Kid's probably never built anything real or substantial in his entire life." There he was, my old friend Barbie-Face Brandon, still making enemies wherever he went. It turns out that Brandon was just as arrogant and completely useless in Paris as he'd been during his time in Nashville. "Guy's supposedly some hotshot consultant," my client explained. "But every single recommendation he makes costs us money without actually improving anything. He's a classic consultant. Great at talking and presenting, absolutely terrible at actually doing anything productive." When I got home that evening, I did some digging on LinkedIn and found Brandon's profile. He was posting nonstop about his exciting Paris chapter and his commitment to excellence. Meanwhile, his Instagram showed him partying in expensive clubs and dating French women, living it up like he didn't have a care in the world. The contrast was absolutely stark and infuriating. Here was Brandon living his best life in expensive Parisian nightclubs, while the mother of his child was working double shifts serving burgers just to pay her rent. Even for a douchebag consultant, that level of coldness was pretty shocking. Brandon thought moving to Paris would give him a fresh start and let him escape the consequences of his actions. I decided it was time to give Karma his forwarding address. So I sat down and wrote the most professional email of my entire life to Sterling's Paris HR department. I explained how their consultant had abandoned a pregnant woman in Nashville after breaking up her engagement and I attached screenshots of him partying in Paris nightclubs while she worked in food service to survive. I mentioned how this behavior might not align with their stated corporate values regarding integrity and social responsibility. The email was professional but pointed, and I let them draw their own conclusions about having someone like Brandon represent their company to clients. But that wasn't quite enough for me. I did some more digging and found Brandon's parents through social media. William and Nicole Morrison, a big-money Memphis real estate family. The kind of people who care more about their reputation and social standing than almost anything else. Through some creative Facebook stalking, I found his mom's college roommate Martha, who volunteers at a pregnancy resource center in Nashville. She helps single mothers get resources and support during difficult times. It was funny how I just happened to run into her at the farmer's market one Saturday morning. During our casual conversation, I mentioned knowing this struggling single mom named Victoria, who'd been abandoned by some rich Memphis kid named Brandon Morrison. I didn't have to embellish anything. I just told the truth about the situation. Martha was absolutely horrified. Nicole Morrison's son? Oh my goodness, she would be completely mortified if she knew about this, she said. Nicole's always bragging about Brandon's success and character. She has absolutely no idea what he's really been up to. 4 weeks later, my client called me about commissioning another custom car build. During our conversation, he brought up something that made my day. Hey, remember that Brandon guy from Sterling I was complaining about? He said. Well, he got pulled from the Paris office and transferred back to Memphis. Apparently there was some HR issue and family pressure involved. He looked absolutely miserable during our last video call. Brandon's Instagram told the entire story in real time. The fancy Paris party photos stopped dead in their tracks. The expensive restaurant pictures disappeared completely. There was just one sad, pathetic post from what looked like a basic Memphis office building with the caption, "Excited for new opportunities back home." The comments on that post were absolutely brutal. His Paris friends were asking what had happened and why he'd left so suddenly. Memphis family friends were posting fake sympathy messages that you could tell were just for show. But the best part was that someone had tagged Victoria in the comments, asking if this was her baby daddy, which led to a bunch of people connecting the dots about the whole situation. It turns out that Martha didn't just call Brandon's mom Nicole, she organized a full Belle Meade ladies intervention. She got all her socialite friends involved and made it a community-wide issue. Nicole Morrison was so embarrassed and mortified by her son's behavior that she yanked him back to Memphis immediately to deal with the scandal. Not only did she force him to quit his prestigious job at Sterling, but she made him come work for Daddy's real estate company at a fraction of his previous consulting salary. Most importantly, she forced him to set up a trust fund for Victoria and the baby to avoid any further public scandal that might damage the family's reputation. The trust fund arrangement was absolutely the best part of this whole revenge story. Brandon went from making a 6-figure consulting salary and living it up in Paris to working for his parents under strict supervision and paying monthly support to the woman he'd tried to abandon. All because his mommy was embarrassed by his behavior becoming public knowledge. So now, Brandon's stuck back in Memphis, working for his parents' real estate company like a teenager who got caught doing something wrong. He's financially supporting the kid he tried to run away from, and his consulting career is completely toast. No prestigious firm is going to hire someone who got fired from Sterling for personal conduct issues. Victoria's getting monthly payments that probably beat what she was making working double shifts at that restaurant. Plus, she qualified for healthcare coverage through the trust fund. She's not living in luxury, but at least she's not struggling to survive anymore. I didn't have to lift a wrench, throw a punch, or do anything dramatic. I just let karma work its magic through professional networks and concerned soccer moms. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply making sure the right people know the truth about someone's character. The whole situation taught me something important. If a woman ever tells you that some guy is just a friend, especially when that friend is acting like anything but a friend, don't ignore your instincts. Smile, nod politely, and start collecting receipts. Document everything, because you're probably going to need evidence later. Trust your gut when something doesn't feel right. Listen to people like Kevin and my dad, who can see situations clearly from the outside. Don't let anyone gaslight you into thinking you're being paranoid or controlling when you're actually just being observant. Most importantly, know your worth. Don't settle for being someone's backup plan or safety net. If you're not someone's first choice, make yourself unavailable to be their second choice. Victoria chose Brandon over me when it mattered, and I chose to respect that decision by removing myself from the equation entirely. Brandon chose to abandon Victoria when things got complicated, and Karma chose to make sure he faced the consequences. Meanwhile, I'm building something real with Sophia, someone who chose me from the beginning and continues to choose me every day. She didn't need to compare me to anyone else or test our relationship by bringing other men into our living space. The difference between a woman who wants to be with you and a woman who's settling for you is night and day. Once you experience the real thing, you'll never waste time on anything less again. Peace out, everyone. Thanks for following this saga all the way to the end. I appreciate all the comments and advice from people who read the original story. Sometimes life has a way of working things out exactly as they should. And remember, when someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. Don't wait for the second or third demonstration.